Now, when we start looking at pieces, we'll realize that we can break down the piece into what are called phrases. That is, something stated and then something new happens. And at the end of each of these statements, there's going to be a certain kind of harmonic progression. And that kind of harmonic progression is going to either give us the sense of finality, that something's concluded, or a sense that we need to keep going. We're not quite finished. There are a number of different kinds of cadences, but the number of them isn't terribly large, and I'd like to present them all here. I'd like to start with the cadences that don't give us a sense of finality. And by that I mean, if you get to the end of a phrase and you feel like the piece could end there, that's a real conclusion. But a lot of times we get to the end of a phrase and we feel like, well, we can't end there, we need to keep going. And in many cases, in phrases where we don't have a sense that we could finish the piece there, we have what's called a half cadence. And in a half cadence, okay, so we're in C minor. We have the C chord, the 1 chord, the F chord, the 4 chord, and then the 5 chord. And this is very common. We could describe a half cadence as something going to 5. So in this case, it's 4 going to 5. It could be 1 going to 5. It could be a number of things. It could be 2 diminished going to 5. But when we get to the end of the phrase, the last chord that we hear is a 5 chord. And this thing is going to feel like it really, we're not done. We need at least another phrase, or at least another chord, to end the piece. Half cadences are extremely common. They're one of, I would say, 3 chord types that are really commonly found in classical music. And in fact, if you only knew those 3 cadence types, and I'll mention which 3 they are, you could very easily compose very convincing, stylistically convincing fakes of classical era music. There's a variation of this half cadence that you find only in minor keys, and it's called the Phrygian half cadence. And the thing that really marks the Phrygian half cadence is this. You notice, this is also a 1-4-5 chord progression. Let me do some harmonic analysis though. Here we've got our 1. And here we've got our 4, but our 4 isn't in root position, it's in first inversion. And then we get the 5. And let's say our phrase ends on the 5. Well, what we notice is that this is the 6th scale degree. So here's the 1st scale degree. We go down to the B flat, that's the 7th. Here's the 6th scale degree. And this 6th scale degree in minor is a semitone away from this 5th scale degree. And when we get this lowered 6th scale degree going to the 5th scale degree at a cadence, we call that a Phrygian half cadence. This name comes, for some of you, you might know this, the name actually comes from a church mode called Phrygian. And the Phrygian mode is distinctive because there is between the 1st scale degree and the 2nd scale degree, there is a semitone. And so here, that's why it's so important that this is a semitone. That's why this can't happen in major, because in major, of course, the 6th scale degree, well, let's say this was C major. This 6th scale degree would be an A natural. Well, the A natural is a whole tone away from the G, and we need that semitone. Let me play these 2 so you can hear them. They're not going to really sound like cadences. They're just going to kind of sound like chord progressions. It's really only in music where we can really hear cadences, because it's more than just the chord progression. The chord progression doesn't make the cadence. It's how the music behaves plus the chord progression that gives us a sense of cadence. But nonetheless, let's hear these progressions. So half cadence, Phrygian half cadence are both what we could call inconclusive cadences. Sometimes they're called weak cadences. We can't end pieces on these cadences. We need to at least have another phrase or at least another couple of chords in order to get a sense of finality and closure. Let's now look, though, at the chord, one of the chords that we really can end on, and this is called a perfect authentic cadence. Now, the perfect authentic cadence, here I have, we're in C minor, 2 in first inversion. Sorry, let me put in the Roman numerals. This is 2 diminished 6, and it's going to a 5, and then it's going to 1. Let me play this so you can hear it. There's a real sense of closure, even just in hearing the harmonic progression. We can hear that this really has a sense of closure. Now, the perfect authentic cadence involves 5 going to 1, but it's even more specific than that. You need to have root position 5 chords, and these 2 chords, 5 and 1, need to be in root position. And the melody note must be the first scale degree, the tonic. If these 2 things are not the case, then you do not have a perfect authentic cadence. Let's take another example. Let's do this instead. I mean, this is terrible voice leading. Sorry about this. But I just want to get this so that it's not in root position. Now we have the 3rd in the bass. And we have a 5 in first inversion going to 1. Is this a perfect authentic cadence? No, it's not. So, well then, what do we call it? We call it something pretty close to perfect authentic cadence. We call it imperfect authentic cadence. Okay. And what happens if our melody note if we did this instead? Something like this. Okay, this is root position now. And this is root position. Good, we have perfect authentic. No, actually, this is the 3rd scale degree. Oh. Okay, well then it's not perfect authentic. It's still an imperfect authentic cadence. Now, these imperfect authentic cadences are stronger in quality or closer to a sense of closure than the half cadences are. But we nonetheless, this is a very important thing to recognize with classical music, especially in Mozart's era. You will not find a piece of music, well, okay, maybe, I'm afraid to say these things, these definites, like you'll never find this, because you probably, someone can go and look it up and find one. But you will almost never find a piece of music from Mozart's era that actually ends on anything other than the 1st scale degree. So this note, the melody note being the 1st scale degree, is extremely important for not just getting the right cadence, but for getting the right sound and imitating the style correctly. Okay, so we talked also earlier about substitutions, right? So can we substitute here? If this was let's say a 7 diminished 6 chord. So let me do that real quick. Maybe something like this. 7 diminished 6. Is this acceptable? Yes, this is completely acceptable, but this too is an imperfect authentic cadence. So you see there are very strict rules for a perfect authentic cadence. Perfect authentic cadence must have root position 5 and 1 chords, and it must have the 1st scale degree in the melody when it gets to the 1 chord. If it doesn't have those things, it's still a kind of authentic cadence, but we call it an imperfect authentic cadence. Now, of course, a variation on this perfect authentic cadence, which gives us a different, completely different feel, and we just experienced it when talking about substitutions between 1 and 6 chords. We get this deceptive cadence. And again, deceptive cadence, not always, but almost always you're going to find with root position 5 and 6 chords. And there's an interesting thing to note that I was skipping on a bit in the last presentation. But it's an interesting thing to note about voice leading. Now that we have a real 4-part texture here, I can point it out. This is a root position chord, this 6 chord. But you'll notice something about how it's voiced, and you'll say, oh, there's an error here, but there isn't. Root, third, and fifth. That is, there are 2 thirds. And you say, wait, it's a root position triad. It should have 2 roots. But the truth is that, especially in a homophonic passage like this, a homorhythmic passage, there are often no good voice leading solutions, especially in minor, to going from 5 to 6 and not getting that augmented second. So the solution to it then is to simply double the third when you get here. Now, if you're not in a simple texture like this, you can often include non-chord tones, passing tones for instance, and you can completely avoid the augmented second. And you can get to a chord it's voiced with 2 roots, a third and a fifth. But that's not possible in this situation. So that's an overview of the cadences that you find in classical music. What I want to do is start looking at some musical examples and start identifying these cadences and start using that as a way to talk about, to define phrases. And once we've defined phrases, we can start talking about those phrases that exist in a passage of music and how they relate to each other.